Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
that looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
For something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. In last week's edition of Challenge 2.0, we began a conversation with a Lutheran pastor. Her congregation has elected to become a sanctuary. We're going to talk about what their experience has been, what the implications are, and what perhaps that calls the rest of us to do as we witness situations of immigrants and refugees of all ages being plucked off the streets and either being sent to their country of origin or entirely different nations. That then is the focus of this edition of Challenge 2.0. So if you had the opportunity to watch a riveting conversation on this whole issue of sanctuary and rights and consideration of the needs of people that are either immigrants or refugees in our country, we had said that Pastor Joanne Anquist was going to agree to come back and be a part of the conversation and look at some of the other implications. So, Joanne, thanks so much for agreeing to stick with us a little bit longer.
Glad to continue the conversation.
Because we can't assume that everybody saw last week, I'd like you to just give a little bit of your path on what caused you to embrace the issues and the needs of immigrants and refugees as part of your ministry and as part of your faith ministry at Gethsemane Lutheran.
So I think one piece that adds a little twist even from what we talked about in the last episode is Gethsemane Lutheran began in 1885, the first Lutheran congregation in Seattle. And it was a community, of course, of immigrants. They happened to come from Sweden. It has been foundational to the community's understanding. So even though I only arrived here in 2011, as I started digging through some of the records, it was interesting to me to see the ways and the junctures at which this community had lived this out already. It didn't inform, in a calculating way, what we were going to do. But I think that it's part of the DNA of the community to say, we understand something about what it is to be the outsider and a desire to welcome for a long time, for 85 years now, assisting a refugee or asylum seeker, an immigrant, is in fact rooted in identity as people, and our relationships become key. So in 2017 then, during the first Trump administration and its executive orders that initially produced all kinds of protests around the Muslim ban and the travel bans for other people from countries that were predominantly Muslim, people in our congregation started saying, but Pastor, what else can we do? Marching isn't enough. Saying no isn't enough. There must be something. And so Gethsemane, with dozens of other congregations and faith communities around the Sound, said, yeah, let's get some training and learn more about the practice of sanctuary and how we might, in fact, put ourselves out there in new ways on behalf of more recent arrivals.
I want to talk about some of the specifics, and I know you actually did serve as a sanctuary residence for someone. We're looking now, typically those that are getting picked up are Hispanic or people of color. If we look back in the history of the United States, you mentioned Sweden. I can think of my family, which emigrated to this area because of need. It was not a smooth road for those people either. There was prejudice. There were false narratives that were being given. Maybe just walk us through about this has been an ongoing problem over much of the history of this country.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my favorite pieces when I lived on the East Coast, I would often take people on a little tour to New York City from Boston. And one of my favorite places to go was the Tenement Museum. It's not very popular on the tourist thing, but It's a fascinating look into generations
Mm-hmm.
of basically how immigrants were received there on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And what was for me then eye-opening was this understanding that continued to grow, to say this problem we're having now, understanding how to integrate folks who are coming from other places, is not new. If we read history well, we can see that there are inflection points. There are certain moments when it's been particularly hard. In the very beginning of 2025, shortly after the administration's inauguration, the Doge campaign decided to pick on Lutheran community services.
Right.
Right? Lutheran social services in America touches something like 1 in 4 people in the United States. It's massive. We're a pretty small church in many ways. But our action on behalf of our neighbor, they don't have to be a Lutheran. We're Lutheran. That's why we act. Our action on behalf of the neighbor was called into question. That it was a money laundering scheme was what came out. You know, like all these things, and you look and go, well, the good side of that is that I was talking with a bishop in the Central States, we'll just call it that, who typically has said, you know, people don't really show up very often to rally at the Capitol. Well, they got a lot of people who said, "You're coming after us? Like, we're going to tell you what we do. This is what we do with that money. You know, we provide social services to those who are most vulnerable. We have picked up a piece of what the government, in many of our understandings, should be doing,
Right.
but has failed to do, regardless of whether it should or shouldn't. It is not doing, and we are the social safety net." So, does that include immigrants and refugees? Yes. Is it exclusive to immigrants and refugees? No, not at all. 1 in 4 people.
That's an amazing proportion. Now, you mentioned, and you talked back in 2017, that you began to discern this need to get involved in a more deep basis in terms of immigration and refugee needs. And you actually served as a sanctuary. In the last episode, we talked a little bit about that. But perhaps for review, just say what that looked like, because you actually did have somebody in residence, but that's not always the case. Could you just refresh our memory on that?
Yeah, so on April 9th in that year, we voted to become sanctuary, to say that we would be a community rooted in our understanding that we need to advocate for the needs of newcomers, refugees, asylum seekers, and that we would be a place of refuge to create space that would provide safety for a person at risk, and that we would continue to be outspoken on behalf of those without voice in this. In our entryway, we have several icons, but not the classic. Well, we have a couple of classic ones as well, but not distant. They're more modern. And one of them, I think every child has commented on, and it's an image of the Holy Family in flight, the narrative that they are fleeing after Jesus is born. But he's a little older in this picture, kind of thing. But they're fleeing, and they look like migrants from Mexico or Central America. And every child looks at them and says, "That's me. That's me." I don't think that child knows that this is a story, this is a picture that is depicting the Christ child,
Right.
Mary and Joseph. But I need to hear, that's this child.
Right.
And I think it's that shift of the vision that helps us keep saying, how do we open ourselves, not just our eyes, but our minds and our hearts, to the need of our neighbor, whether that's the lovely woman who served me coffee this morning, or this little child, or the man who's got a deportation order because the police department won't fill out a form that acknowledges he's the victim of a crime.
Your church and some others have taken the very intentional step of becoming a physical sanctuary at times, or volunteering to do so. I anticipate that there are probably people watching from any number of different faith communities or other groups that are saying, we'd like to be involved. Is there a range of things we can do? What would you tell them?
Absolutely. As I make my rounds in community meetings, one of the things that I say is, not every faith community has the physical facilities for this, and may not have the emotional or economic means to be able to provide for this, but we're all needed to work together for different parts. One moment I remember receiving a phone call from someone when Jose was living with us. It was early on, and I'd never heard of these people. I didn't know what. He said, my Bible study group has been praying because we read this in the newspaper, and we're thinking, and so we got some groceries together, and we just like to drop them off. Now, there was a part of me that was like hyper vigilant. Is this real? Like, what's going on? I was like, yes, I'll meet you. Right. And it was just so lovely to see somebody say, well, I don't think I can do much more, but here's a couple bags of groceries, and here's some gas cards that their family could use to come back and forth when they visit. Everything from that kind of piece to being the ones who coordinate resources for getting kids into school or whatever. Like, there's so much to be done and so much need. And that's true whether a person's in sanctuary or not. The reality right now, Jeff, is that the current climate has people so afraid. And I'm not only talking about the more obvious black and brown bodies that I treasure who are from Central America and Mexico and Africa and Haiti. I'm talking about every immigrant. I had a family sitting with me 2 nights ago, simply shaking in fear for hours at the thought that someone was going to come and pick them up and deport them. They have a legal status as asylum seekers, but it doesn't feel like that to people. So meeting the needs of food banks, they don't feel safe to go to a food bank anymore. And they're hungry. Many, you've read in the papers, are not feeling safe to go to work anymore.
Or school.
People don't go to school. People don't go to church. Like, there's all kinds of things that and there's a cost that will be involved in that, not only for the immigrant community, but for all the rest of us too.
We hear in the reaction to this sometime people saying, instead of coming here because they're afraid of the situation in their own country, they need to go back there and fix it themselves. And yet, isn't it true that very often the U.S. government or U.S. businesses have been part of the reason that situations have deteriorated in those countries and that they've had to seek either asylum or refuge or just move out outright?
Yeah, I think it's stunning. And what I've come to understand as I've gotten to know the stories of those who have fled their homelands is, to varying degrees, but many of them, if not most, have worked as hard as they can to oppose the injustice. The difference is there's a threat against your life for it in many of these places, as opposed to just being told to be quiet in the United States. we saw some of that fear rise up in response to what happened in LA recently. We don't, as a practice, send the National Guard to do local community policing. We don't send the Marines to enforce something for our own people. And so it made people rise up. You know, the No King's Day protest on the 14th was massive, as I understand, like close to 5% of the population out. But the unseen piece was what it also did to our immigrant neighbors who are re-traumatized because they firmly believe that this country is better than the one they came from. That our ideals and our vision and our democratic approach to things means that stuff doesn't happen. So now they're caught in this mix of, did I leave my homeland where I was at risk, believing that this better way, not just economically preferable, but better way of treating people, was my goal, and now is it still here? Is that what is present? It's really a striking piece. It's way too easy for us to be able to say, well, you should have just fixed it at home. It's not possible.
I think you also bring up the issue that is occasionally raised, and that is some will say, well, what does this have to do with religion? And I suspect you've been asked that.
I have.
And I suspect you have some good responses to that. For people that are wondering, what do I say to people when they bring up that issue? What would you tell them? How do you respond?
So, I do believe it has everything to do with what the Christian teaching has. And I think that's probably true in many other faith communities as well. I hear my fellow religious leaders in other traditions speak of it as well. I come from this tradition. Back to those PLU days again, my wonderful campus pastor had introduced me to Father Andrew Greeley, and one of his quotes that I think you've seen on my Facebook page is about Jesus and his troublemaking, go merrily onward.
Yes.
Right? It catches some people off guard because they're like, wait, like that no, Jesus is all about love and quietness and saving me. I think Jesus was really about upending injustice and righting relationship, whether that's me with God or me with my neighbor. And I believe that ultimately the Christian church's teaching is around this incarnational understanding that God loves and is willing to suffer and go to the very end for us and with us. Therefore, we do the same. Our job, because in the Lutheran teaching, it was all about because we have this justification, we're freed up to then love and be for our neighbor. We are completely bound and completely free all at the same time. And so I think to look at that Jesus and the troublemaking piece, especially in the beautiful way that Pastor Dan Erlander drew it out, is that we have a responsibility to challenge the status quo and to be a positive force, to get into the kind of good trouble like John Lewis would thing, and to redefine that troublemaking can be rooted in love, that it can be all about compassion and service, not about disturbing. It's not anarchies. It's not disturbing for the opportunity to, because you're free to do that. It's about a purpose that says love for the neighbor is going to guide my action. So I understand people who would like to say that Christianity or their faith community is a private thing.
Mm-hmm.
But fundamentally, I think that's a misread of what the faith tradition is. I believe at its heart, it has a certain interference.
Mm-hmm.
It's about upending things that are wrong and making new relationship and making new life.
In that spirit, as people are watching and saying, well, what should I do? What suggestions would you give them, even if they're looking to take some baby steps in this?
So my favorite quote from the Bonhoeffer days that I apply to this action is that we're not simply to bandage the wounds of victims beneath the wheels of injustice.
Mm-hmm.
We are to drive a spoke into the wheel itself. And every time I come back to that, it reminds me that this is the hardest work I have ever done as a pastor. And it's also been the most grounded work. It feels so right
Mm-hmm.
to be open to my neighbor in this way. And I suppose there's another Lutheran pastor from that period, just after Bonhoeffer's execution. Pastor Martin Niemöller was making the rounds. His quote, of course, was, first they came for the socialists, and I didn't object because I wasn't socialist. The trade unionists, I didn't object, I wasn't a trade unionist. The Jews, I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one to speak up.
Mm-hmm.
So we look now and say, who's in the crosshairs,
Mm-hmm.
Particularly with unjust policies, and how are we then called to use what we have and who we are? Now, for some of our eldest members of the congregation, they said to me, Pastor, I feel strongly about this.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one 90-some-year-old who said, I still remember that I did nothing when they came and took my classmates who were Japanese, and I feel guilty.
Mm-hmm.
60, 70 years later. I feel the weight of this. I need to do something, but I'm 96 years old. What am I supposed to do? Pray.
Yeah.
Encourage someone else. Write a letter to your congressperson. Tell them your story and your perspective, because some days, we live in a place where many of our elected leaders have pretty similar views to mine on these things. Sometimes they're just discouraged and they need to hear my story so that they can keep on. Don't give yourself over to the idea that, oh, well, they already agree with me, so I don't need to write a letter or call or whatever. Know that your voice matters, encouraging your neighbor. When I was at the coffee shop earlier and saw the interaction, what I most marveled at was this older cis white man engaging in broken Spanish with our server and bursting into this delight that he could make himself known in her language.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, do what you're able to do in the moment. And keep educating yourself about other ways that you might be able to make a difference in this world through advocacy and direct action. There was this moment when Jose's granddaughter, we were going to the detention center frequently.
Mm-hmm.
We went through the work of trying to get her in.
Mm-hmm.
She's actually a U.S. citizen, and we are, so we could accompany her in to see her grandpa. And she's like, but there's a glass, and this little tiny hand goes to the glass, and she's like, I don't want to talk on the phone. I just want to touch him.
Mm-hmm.
And he put his hand up there, and she couldn't understand why she couldn't make that connection.
Right.
And then we went out of the room, and she's singing. And I'm like, what song is she singing? We are a gentle, gentle people, and we are singing for our lives. She'd learned the song with, albeit slightly wrong words, at all the marches and protests that we'd been at. And when I'm about ready to give up and say, I just can't do anymore, I see her hand go up on that wall, that window, and I hear, we are a gentle, gentle people. And I realize we all have to be singing and acting and marching for our lives. And we don't have one way forward. We have this collective that we all are together, better, stronger, and able to work for justice when we don't isolate. This is the joy of it and the challenge.
Pastor Enquist, I thank you so much for being a part of this movement, this conversation. And I suspect, if nothing else, if people say, I'd like to know a little bit more about how I could be involved in this, if they reached out to Gethsemane, you might be able to give them some avenues to follow up on.
Absolutely. I'll bet you can put a link in the show notes, but urbanfaith.org.
We'll do that. Thank you so much. And thank you, each of you, for tuning in this week to this edition of Challenge 2.0. We hope you'll join us again next week.